The Free Syrian Army, an armed wing of the Syrian opposition, has claimed responsibility for two massive explosions in the city of Aleppo. The blasts have killed at least 25 and injured some 175. The explosions hit a military intelligence complex and a security force base. Aleppo, Syria's northern city, has been relatively quiet since mass anti-government protests started in March. The government claims it's fighting a foreign-funded insurgency and blamed terrorists for several bombings in the capital Damascus late last year. The violence has escalated in Syria since the past week, with opposition forces claiming Assad's forces are shelling several areas, including the flashpoint city of Homs. Activists are accusing the government of a massacre, saying hundreds of civilians have been killed. Let's get more on the situation from journalist Lizzie Fielding, now joining us live from London. Thanks for coming on RT today. The Free Syrian Army now claiming responsibility for these enormous blasts in Syria today. Do you think there's any chance that could change NATO states' attitudes towards the armed opposition groups in the country?
Well, I mean, I would say that this attack was directed from London, Tel Aviv, Paris and New York. It's quite clear that the explosions themselves were huge. I've spoken to people in Aleppo today who are in fear for their lives, and there were people up to 20 kilometers away who felt the explosion. So let's look at the evidence for the fact that this attack was actually directed externally. Of course, it was carried out by so-called Free Syrian Army insurgents. But first of all, I'd just like to say that this attack is clearly a response to the Russian and Chinese veto. It is a message from the West that if we don't get our way through the United Nations Security Council, we are going to go ahead with destabilizing the Syria by any means possible. So first of all, we've had in the first minutes after the explosion and half an hour or so, we had the Western and GCC media mooting the claims that the Syrian government was responsible for the attacks. But of course, it was France 24 who broke the news that the Colonel Arif Hamoud claimed responsibility for the attack. So, of course, we had William Hague just a few days ago in the British media promising that Britain would support the Free Syrian Army by any means that they could. And, of course, that means political support, financial support and military support. And it is no coincidence, I would say, that it seems to be always the French media that breaks the announcements by Free Syrian Army officers claiming responsibility for attacks. Of course, it was Le Figaro who broke the announcement by Free Syrian Army officers that they were responsible for the killing of France 2 journalist Gilles Jacquier and 8 other Syrian civilians. So this indicates a very close communication and frequent communication between the French media and the French and the opposition. And then, of course, just a few days ago as well, a video emerged online of Israeli official Ayub Kara and Free Syrian Army officer Abu Bilal, where they were talking in much depth about how they could cooperate more closely. And then at the same time, we are seeing in the media an increase in accusations of Syrian government violence against civilians in Homs. But since the military operation to protect civilians in Homs began, the Syrian military have found a number of caches of weapons, of Israeli weapons, including Uzis and anti-tank weapons. So we cannot separate the attack in Aleppo today. That there are reports that more than 150 people have been killed, but so far the Ministry of Health has only been able to identify 25 bodies. This is because the explosions were so strong that there are literally pieces of people's bodies, of children's bodies, strewn across the streets. And then the other evidence that this was conducted by external or facilitated by external intelligence is that, as you mentioned in your report, the attacks took place in very sensitive areas outside military buildings and law enforcement agencies, where obviously there will be a very high level of security. So
Lizzie, I'm terribly sorry to interrupt you. If I may just jump in just for a moment here. It's simply very, very interesting how you discuss that there are external players here that are creating a spinal column, a backbone to help help the armed opposition against the Assad regime. But as you talk about these two enormous bombs going off in Aleppo, the US and its allies are looking into supporting the Syrian opposition, including arming the rebels and creating a, quote, humanitarian corridor. Would you say, some might say, this sounds suspiciously like that no-fly zone over Libya, according to UN Resolution 1973?
Yes, well, absolutely. I mean, they can't, they are unable to get the United Nations Security Council resolution to have a Libya-style UN fig leaf for the intervention. So, as we know, they are doing it through other means. And the Israeli intelligence website, Debka, themselves reported just a couple of days ago that there were British and Qatari special forces already on the ground in Syria. So, because of the Russians' determination to uphold international law and prevent a direct violation of Syria's sovereignty and interference in their internal affairs, which is already taking place because of the West's support for these insurgents on the ground, then the West, as I said, is going to try any means possible to destabilize the country by not going through the United Nations. And let's be clear that the Russian stance of consistently and continuously reminding the world of its international obligations under international law is being continuously rubbished by the West, as we've seen in these explosions today, who are determined to violate all of its responsibilities under international law in order to get its way in Syria, in order to destabilize the country, so that it can get hold of the geostrategic area that is Syria, so that it can have a strategic advantage in its later confrontations that it is pushing for with Russia and Iran.
All right, journalist Lizzie Fielding. Wish we had more time for this. We don't. Live from London. Thank you.